Hello, I'm Abby Leibman, the President and CEO of MAZON, a Jewish response to hunger. I want to welcome all of you to This is Hunger, a conversation with MAZON, Congressman Adam Schiff, Margaret Morrow, the CEO of Public Counsel, and Marisa de la Torre, lead coordinator of Lancer Pantry at Pasadena City College. We're holding this conversation today because we are all longtime champions for food justice in America, and we are all keenly aware that as the COVID-19 pandemic has ravaged our country, it's thrown into stark relief the realities of hunger in America and the sad limitations of the systems upon which we've relied to respond to those who are struggling with food insecurity. In January of 2020, there were almost 40 million Americans for whom hunger was the painful reality in their lives. A few short weeks later, there are now over 60 million people who do not know where their next meal is going to come from. This has led us to those stunning images we've seen of cars lined for miles waiting to access a food bank, or governors petitioning the federal government to allow them to have people access SNAP online, to look for other exceptions to the rules that they've been struggling with to try to help people access food. And of course, as advocates, we have been clamoring for the federal government to restore the tears in the safety net that this administration has rent through our systems. MAZON has been among the leading voices working for policy changes that will allow all Americans to access SNAP and to receive adequate benefits to support their families. MAZON was founded in 1985, and its mission to end hunger and its causes in America and Israel has never wavered in all that time. We're committed to protecting and strengthening the nutrition safety net for everyone who needs it. And we've learned from long years of experience that among our nation's vulnerable, there are some who are far too often overlooked or whose needs are left unaddressed. These include seniors, college students, veterans, Native Americans, single mothers, and even currently serving military families. Many of these Americans face unique and additional obstacles that deter them from even applying for SNAP, and frequently shame and stigma even when they do apply. At MAZON, we're committed to making certain that people can access what they need, including government benefits, with dignity and respect, and that no one, regardless of circumstances, deserves to be hungry. The USDA has been among the lead agencies in this country that has the responsibility to respond to hunger in America. And in this circumstance, since this pandemic began, they have been slow and ineffectual. Last week, they even announced that they are going to continue to pursue a legal challenge to a regulation that they had passed to limit how long people can be on SNAP. That would be a tragic outcome at any time, and at this time, it will be devastating. SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or food stamps, that is more commonly known, is the lifeblood of the nutrition safety net in this country. It's our flagship program. It was designed beautifully in the 1930s and has been improved upon and expanded through the 1970s into the 80s. And then it began to be attacked, to be undermined, to be curtailed. And we are seeing the terrible results of what happens when this program is not allowed to operate as it should. We know that USDA and indeed the entire federal government are essential in this time of need, because we know that charity alone cannot meet the need of 60 million people to put nutritious food on the table, 3 meals a day, every day. The federal government is and must be the central starting point for how we respond to growing needs of hunger during this pandemic and into the future. And that's why all of us continue to urge Congress to turn its attention to this issue and to do what we all know is vital to meet the needs of people who are struggling with food insecurity. And today, who better to open this conversation than one of our country's two leaders in Congress. Congressman Adam Schiff is serving his 10th term in the United States House of Representatives, where he represents California's 28th Congressional District and serves as chair of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Throughout his tenure in Congress, Congressman Schiff has been a leader on national security and foreign policy, as well as improving the economy, improving public safety, helping small businesses, and improving education. He is a longtime advocate of SNAP and other federal nutrition programs, and he is also an outspoken proponent of addressing and ending food insecurity among college students, one of those more vulnerable populations I mentioned earlier. Prior to serving in Congress, Congressman Schiff served in the California State Senate and as a U.S. Attorney in Los Angeles, California. Congressman?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join you today, and thank you for all the great work that MAZON has done on food insecurity. We're all very much in your debt. I thought I would start talking about the approach that the administration and Congress are taking, the problems that we've experienced, and I really look forward to our discussion today. I think Americans are heartbroken when they see on their television screens images of farmers pouring milk down the drain or letting crops go fallow or plowing them under when there are food lines miles and miles long. And people are struggling to get enough to eat, and there's this incredible waste going on that is tragic for those who are hungry, tragic for those that are growing and producing the nation's food supply. And you would think that in a country as technologically sophisticated as the United States, something like this would never happen. There are, I think, good answers and good solutions if we're willing to take them and undertake them. But first, I wanted to just mention that the problem of food insecurity, as many of you know only too well, didn't start with the pandemic. This has been a persistent challenge in the United States. The effort that I was making with respect to community colleges just dealt with one facet of the problem, that now a significant percentage of college students are food insecure. Many community college campuses have food banks now on campus when they didn't need them during the Great Recession. The food insecurity problem is even more profound now, and that was pre-pandemic than during the worst of the recession. So it was a pre-existing problem, but it of course has been multiplied now. 30 to 40% of those going out to food banks had never been to a food bank before. We're not used to seeing these images of people lined up miles and miles to get food. The demand on these regional and local food banks is 7 or 8 times higher than what they've experienced in the past, and they're simply not equipped to deal with that. Now, the approach the administration has taken, and I completely agree, it has been slow and heavy-handed and ham-handed, as it has been more generally with the pandemic response. But it is essentially to embark on a new program of buying from some of these farmers and supplying the food banks with the food that they purchase. But there are a lot of problems with this approach. While some of this effort, I think, is very important, it is not sufficient to the magnitude of the crisis. For one thing, the food banks themselves don't have, they're staffed by volunteers. They don't have the capacity, given the hunger that is out there right now. And many of the firms that are being contracted with by the USDA, there are already concerns, have no experience in the food chain of supply. One of the reasons why oversight is going to be so very important. There is a really good mechanism for dealing with food insecurity, and it doesn't require you to set up new programs, and it doesn't require you to stand up a whole new infrastructure, and it's called SNAP. It works very well, and that program can be expanded. In the HEROES Act we just passed, we allocate billions more for SNAP. We allocate billions more for child nutrition. That's an infrastructure that's already there. You empower people to go to their own grocery stores, use the distribution network that's already in existence. And more than that, it should be expanded to let people who are using SNAP benefits buy food at restaurants as well. It will help those restaurants stay in business. It will help people access good food close to where they live. There are experiments in allowing people to do online purchasing with their SNAP benefits that ought to be expanded. So we can solve this problem, but we do have to get past some stereotyping of who relies on SNAP benefits and people who would just pejoritize those that require the assistance of food stamps or SNAP benefits, because the need is so great. In fact, I think we ought to tie unemployment right now to SNAP. If you're on unemployment, you should get SNAP benefits as long as you're on unemployment. So there are some, I think, very common sense things that we should undertake that would make a dramatic difference in people's lives right now. And I appreciate the opportunity to join the discussion.
Thank you, Congressman. And I think that your closing is the perfect opening for our next speaker. Judge Margarate Morrow is president and CEO of Public Counsel, which is one of LA's outstanding nonprofit organizations, and it ranks among the top legal services agencies in the country. Public Counsel's clients include some of the most vulnerable people who are struggling with a broad array of legal, financial, and other issues, including low-income families, women and girls, veterans, immigrants, and people experiencing homelessness. Importantly, Public Counsel is also committed to enrolling their clients in vital government benefits like SNAP, which is called CalFresh in California. Prior to joining Public Counsel, Judge Morrow served as U.S. District Judge, Central District of California from 1990, until she joined Public Counsel in 2015. She practiced law in Los Angeles, and she was the first woman to serve as president of the State Bar of California. Judge Morrow, I hope that you can enlighten us about not only how important it is for people to apply for SNAP, but some of the challenges that may lie in the way of getting access to SNAP despite qualifying for it.
Thanks, Abby, for including me on this program. I'm really delighted to be here. As Abby said, Public Counsel is a public interest law firm in Los Angeles. We've been in existence for 50 years. This is our 50th anniversary. And we provide services across a wide array of areas. But the one that's most relevant here today is, as Abby mentioned, our homelessness prevention law project. That project for more than 20 years has run a program that we call CARES, Connecting Angelinos to Resources and Essential Services. The way that program operated, and this is really an on-the-ground picture, I think, for everyone who's listening in on this webinar today. The way that program operated was that we sent our advocates into the offices that are all around the County of Los Angeles of the Department of Public Social Services, DPSS. And they would go into the offices to help folks who were coming there to obtain or apply for general relief assistance and also other types of benefits. SNAP is one of the key benefits that clientele really needs to be able to access. So we would help them fill out the general relief application. We would help them fill out the SNAP application. And in most cases, they were successful in obtaining the benefits that either kept them in housing or helped them get off the street and into housing, and in all cases really kept them alive. In March, when the stay-at-home orders were issued both by Governor Newsom and by Mayor Garcetti, DPSS and by Supervisor Barger, DPSS offices closed. And the only way to access SNAP or CalFresh, as it's called in California, was either online or through the phone. A lot of our clients, the ones that we would meet in these offices when our advocates went there, they don't have computer access. They didn't even know why the offices were closed down or what their alternatives were for obtaining assistance. So the first problem was major lack of information in terms of how to go about accessing benefits. So, advocates in the community really lobbied DPSS to do better on that. And somewhere in early April, I believe, DPSS put on its phone menu for its customer service center some instructions about how people could apply for SNAP or CalFresh benefits. Still, however, we had lots of folks who couldn't get through on that telephone line. It's always jammed. And so in mid to late April, advocates convinced DPSS to put paper applications outside the doors of their offices all around the county and a drop box where they could place their completed application. Once again, however, there were other problems. So what we have seen since March is an overwhelming number of calls coming into our intake lines asking for help in somehow filing an application for CalFresh or SNAP. And we are not alone in this. Our legal services partners in the community have also seen a huge surge in the number of these calls. And it's because, as I said earlier, lots of the people who need these benefits don't have computer access. Lots of them are seniors who are uncomfortable using technology and really need help filling out an online application. They need somebody to walk them through it or to do it for them. And then there's language barriers. The paper applications that DPSS leaves outside its office doors are usually in English, Spanish. Sometimes, depending on the community where the office is located, they could be in Korean or Armenian, but there's still major language issues with accessing the application for SNAP. So let me just give you a little bit of a sense of the type of people who have been calling our offices and that we have been able to help. For example, a couple who actually didn't call us for SNAP or CalFresh, they called us because they were trying to locate the nearest grab and go site to their house. A grab and go site is a location where the LA Unified School District was handing out meals to families whose children had been receiving those meals at the school, but of course the school's closed, and so they were then able to go and pick them up. Well, we helped them figure out where the nearest grab and go location was, but at the same time in the conversation, we learned that they were probably eligible for SNAP, CalFresh. So we filled out an application, helped them fill out an application, and they are now receiving $497 a month in CalFresh benefits. We also determined that they were probably eligible for what is called a pandemic EBT card, PEBT. And what that gives you is $365, up to $365 per month for each school-age child who had been receiving either a free or a reduced meal. They haven't heard yet on that score from the authorities, but if they are successful in getting those benefits as well, that'll be an additional $730 a month because they have 2 school-age children. Then there was another woman who came to us specifically hoping that we would help her file an application for SNAP. We did that, and she is now receiving $300-something a month, I believe, in SNAP benefits, but she only heard about her successful application this month, May. We applied for her in April. So in the interim, we were able to refer her to the Dream Center food bank, where she was able to actually access food while she was waiting to hear about her CalFresh benefits. There have been delays that seem excessive in terms of having these applications acted on. That may be because the system is overwhelmed, but there are people in really dire need who are going without food because it's taking so long for them to hear about whether they're going to receive these benefits. The last story I want to tell you is, I think, really illustrative of the impact of the pandemic on this program and certainly the need for the program. This client was a single father who had been employed as a machinist. He lost his job when all the businesses shut down. He was not somebody who was used to applying for SNAP or going to food banks or anything like that. He was able to earn a living and put food on the table for his family. He came to us actually, and this relates to something the congressman said, he came to us for help in securing unemployment benefits. So there really is a link between SNAP and unemployment benefits. We were able to help him file a application for those unemployment benefits, which was successful. He just received $4,000 last week. But we also determined that he was eligible to apply for SNAP. So we suggested that to him, and he said, "Oh, I couldn't. I'm sure I'm not eligible for that." But we said, "Yeah, we really think you are. Go ahead, let's apply for it." He was really reluctant to do so, but we convinced him to do so, and now he's receiving over $300 a month in SNAP benefits, as well as the unemployment insurance. So what this tells you is there are way more people who need to access these benefits now than there ever have been before. As Abby said, an additional 20 million people throughout the country, potentially. Incredible need, huge upsurge in requests for help around these programs, which are difficult to access. And I can't say enough about the need to increase benefits by 15%, as the HEROES Act does, to extend the period during which PEBT is available until our schools are able to reopen and children are able to go back to receiving meals on their campuses. It's a huge issue, and I'm just really delighted to be able to participate in the conversation today.
Thank you, Margaret. I think that one of the things that is apparent from both the opening comments from Congressman Schiff and from Judge Morrow's very stunning examples are that there are vital necessities around the federal response to this, but there's also challenges and problems with it, both as it currently exists, much because of what has happened in the past 3 years to the accessibility of SNAP and its viability as a program, but also because there's an important complementary relationship between the government sector and its primary response and the supportive nature of what the charitable response can be. And one of the things that we can see is that there are, again, these special populations for whom there are these challenges in accessing government programs, whether seniors because of issues of stigma and fear about having to expose your finances to others, whether it's because you are a veteran or currently serving military for whom the shame of applying is terrible. And if you're currently serving, there's a glitch in the law that means that your income is artificially inflated so that you can't qualify for SNAP. And if you are among the tribal nations in this country, whom we know are being most seriously affected by the COVID epidemic, you have very limited resources and access and barriers that do not exist for others in our vulnerable communities. And again, at one of those communities that both Congressman Schiff alluded to and that our next speaker will be focusing on are college students, for whom some of the existing rules and regulations around SNAP make it far more difficult, if not unlikely, that they can qualify. Marisa de la Torre is the lead coordinator of the Lancer Pantry at Pasadena City College, where she specializes in distribution, compliance, outreach, and marketing. She is certified in CalFresh application assistance, which has been a priority for her engagement with students facing food insecurity in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis. Marisa and her team at Pasadena City College know all too well that many college students are already suffering from food and housing insecurity before COVID-19. In fact, MAZON did host a congressional briefing in light of new data that came from the Government Accountability Report that revealed that there is a shocking 39% of all undergraduates in this nation, that's almost 7.3 million students, who are at risk of hunger due to low household income. You have to think about these numbers because they're huge and it's hard to get your head around them, but 39% is such a significant part of that undergraduate population. It's shocking. And as this crisis continues, we know that students' finances will continue to be drastically affected. And many students will likely become newly eligible for SNAP. And this is a critical moment where we have to talk about what happens to those eligible students who may not be able to access classes or will not be able to return to school because their campuses won't be reopening. Marisa, I hope that you can enlighten us a little bit about what the efforts are at Pasadena City College that you've been spearheading to try to do something to help this really suffering, struggling population. You have to remember to unmute yourself, Marisa.
Hi, Abby. Sorry. Thank you. And thank you, everybody at MAZON, for inviting me to be here with you all today. It's such a pleasure to have people coming together to address this growing problem of hunger on campus and hunger in our communities and how we can bring it to a heel. So a little bit of background on the Lancer Pantry. We've been working for about 3 years now, helping students and our community members address food insecurity in their home. Before our Safer at Home initiative, we were distributing about 6,000 pounds of food to approximately 1,800 students per month. And that number does not reflect the number of community members that we were also helping to serve. So since the wake of COVID, we have moved to providing remote services. With the amazing staff at Pasadena City College's foundation, we've been able to distribute electronic grocery gift cards to our students. This week, we anticipate reaching 1,000 students, which comes out to a little bit more than $30,000 that we've donated to our students for food relief, which I know has been a tremendous help to them. They've expressed deep gratitude to the Lancer Pantry program and to PCC for helping them through this time. We've also helped them with resource referrals based on students' locations, on their specific needs, finding food banks near them that have a delivery service for students who are themselves or have a family member who are immune compromised. In addition to this, we also help them with CalFresh benefits. We walk them through the application process, answer any questions that they may have regarding documents or other qualifications and eligibility requirements. So working with these students every day, it really humbles you to a degree that's hard to fathom unless you're with this person one-on-one. I know that a lot of our students are feeling very scared right now, uneasy about the challenges that they're facing at home, and they don't know who to reach out to. But I do believe at the end of the day, you know, we all want to feel safe and we all want to feel secure, and some of us just aren't feeling that way. I've talked to single mothers who, just like the stories that Judge Morrow had touched on, you know, single parents who have children that are home now, that have lost their income, and they are struggling to find an adequate food source for their children that, you know, previously schools used to provide. I also have talked to students who have lost their income and they are supporting their elderly parents who are also immune compromised, and it's hard for them to find an adequate food source, so they have to look for someone, not only a food source, but someone who will come to their home to deliver food to them and to their parents so that they can limit that exposure and keep their loved ones safe. I've also spoken to the younger population of PCC, the student base, who are probably around 18 to 23 years old, who are, you know, still just youths themselves, and they're starting out on their educational journey, and, you know, their parents have lost their income, and they're coming to us asking, you know, what can I do to unburden my parents, to help provide something to my family, to bring something to the table because their parents are struggling to provide for them. So, you know, these stories of people facing, or students as well, facing financial hardships and struggling to find adequate food sources are just innumerable. But I know that at the end of the day, they have hope. And they are looking to those of us who are in positions to find resources and to provide that relief and to support them. And that's what we, Pasadena City College, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to walk them through, you know, this struggle until we reach that other side, however long it might be for us. And thankfully, with these new adjustments for CalFresh eligibility, we are seeing a little bit more ease in the application process. We're seeing fuller benefits for our applicants. Like as mentioned before, we have pandemic EBT now, which supports parents who have children K through 12 who would have been on some type of a free or reduced lunch program. And this is amazing. These benefits should be here. They should be robust. And we need to continue on this path. We need to make sure that we have this full, you know, support system for our students. CalFresh, you know, is meant to be this supplemental food program, you know, filling that whole piece of the pie, there, you know, filling just a portion of it. But right now, businesses are closed and people are out of work. So that nutritional pie, it has to be filled. And CalFresh has really, you know, it is rising to the occasion to fill that larger part of the pie, to fill those nutritional needs for our students and for our community members. And we just need to continue with our work, you know, have more CalFresh outreach, make it known to all of our students and community members that this is available to them, and destigmatize this idea that receiving CalFresh and SNAP is, you know, somehow, you know, just, it's, you know, destigmatize it. I'm sorry.
I think that, again, you know, as we talk through what the vulnerabilities around this, you can hear that there are actual concrete regulatory programmatic barriers to people accessing SNAP. And then there are also these emotional ones, societal ones, the pressures that come from people being told that in some way they are doing something wrong by being hungry, that they have made a mistake of something.
Yeah, like the idea of charity and government, like they aren't seen hand in hand, but they are. This, you know, this idea of relying on that government program to provide support, it's okay because we are all in the same boat right now.
That's right. And I would like to open this up a little bit to some questions we have. We got a lot of questions from people who are listening. And one question we got repeatedly, so I'm going to start with that one. I will address to the entire panel. And we'll start with you, Congressman, that in the words of this one particular individual, it is heartbreaking to see so much food being wasted in this country. With all the ingenuity in this country, why isn't there more focus on finding a solution or more modern techniques to fix the food supply chain?
Well, it's a great question. And as I was mentioning before, I think it's just heartbreaking for people to see how much need there is out there and yet how much waste is going on because food is rotting in the fields or has to be plowed under. And there, I think, are fairly simple answers. And I think the most simple is to use the system that we have. Yes, you know, in part, we should do what USDA is proposing to do, which is use funding to purchase these crops and deliver them to food banks. But that requires the setting up a whole new architecture to do that. We have a very good program, the SNAP program, that would allow people in need right now to patronize their local restaurant and use their SNAP benefits, patronize their local grocery stores rather than go to a food bank. And I think that part of the drive to use the food banks by USDA and not use the SNAP program is an ideological one. It is a predisposition against food stamps. As if they're, just some kind of an illegitimate handout for people who aren't willing to work. That's the stereotype. It was interesting when Judge Morrow was describing one of her clients and their reluctance, their reticence to even pursue SNAP. First, because they didn't think they qualified, and then because they weren't, it sounded like they weren't really sure they wanted to take advantage of it. But of course, it's meant for people who have fallen on hard times. And, there are 20 to 25% of the country right now that is unemployed and became unemployed practically overnight. So I think we should use the mechanism we have. We should make it more generous. We should tie it to unemployment. We should allow people to order groceries online. This helps the entire infrastructure. It helps those in the shipping business, helps those in the restaurant business, it helps those in the grocery business, it helps the farmers, and it most of all helps people put food on their table. So I would have to say, in answer to the question, why isn't more being done about this? Part of it is ideological. It's not as if it requires, rocket science to figure this out. And it requires leadership. There has been a real desire, I think, within the administration to abdicate any real federal leadership right now for fear that the administration will get blamed if things don't go well. Well, things have not gone well. There's no escaping responsibility and accountability. The buck does stop with the president, and we need some real leadership. We can appropriate all the money in the world, and Congress is in the HEROES Act that we just passed in the House, appropriating 10 to 15 billion more dollars for SNAP and child nutrition. But if we can't get the administration to spend it efficiently or effectively or at all, of course, it's really not going to meet the needs of the public.
Judge Morrow, do you want to add anything to the Congressman's remarks about the food supply chain?
Sorry. I certainly agree with the Congressman about using available mechanisms, particularly when we're in a time of crisis. We don't really have time to construct new methodologies for moving food into the hands of people who need it, number one. And number two, I was joking with all of you before the program began that I don't really know anything about the food supply chain, but I actually did have occasion to listen to a couple of news articles or news programs recently talking about how complicated it is in terms of certain grades of meat only get sold to restaurants, and certain other types of food only get sent to grocery stores. So it just seems like a very complicated solution, which long-term ought to be looked at, but for this emergency, we ought to rely on what we have available, which is SNAP.
So I would say that, I'm an advocate. I've been an advocate my entire public career. And my colleagues are. And for us, the important thing is to raise the questions, to ask, why is this system so broken? And why are you not fixing it? And people probably can't tell. I'm actually looking at Adam. But it isn't really on Adam's shoulders. It's on all aspects of the federal government. And I think that he's correct that we are working with an administration who, far from being just reluctant to do something to help people who are vulnerable or poor, is actively hostile to them and is aggressively moving to try to marginalize them so much further than they ever have been. That I think that it puts some burden on us to think that we have to fix this, but that is not our job. And I think, Ms. De La Torre, that you too have been pushing and advocating for some changes around these systems. Is that true? You have to unmute yourself, Marisa.
Of course, I'm so sorry. Yes, we do want to advocate for our students to make the application process and eligibility for students easier right now. Some of the eligibility requirements are setting back our students when they apply, and right now we really can't afford to have those barriers in their way to food.
I agree. I mean, food is so fundamental. And I think that's why we've seen such a resonance in this time. And first of all, we're seeing play out in real time in some really horrifying ways how essential this is to people's lives and their livelihoods. And stabilizing our economy will not happen unless and until people are stable and their families are stable and safe and secure. And this system is designed to do that, to provide people with one less thing to have to struggle with as they look for work, as they open up their businesses, as they try to find their footing in a society that's probably been forever changed by this pandemic. And I think in the other questions that we have speak to some of what you've each alluded to, that there are people who are listening to this who live in congressional districts with more conservative representation. And those officials have responded to their requests for change by saying that SNAP's a government handout and that people should pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And this time I will start with you, Judge Morrow, and say, do you have a response to that?
Well, I don't know their particular congressional district or their particular members, so I can't be specific around that. But I guess I would say that it's important to join with advocacy groups that already exist, that are out there, that are pushing on this issue and have been, like MAZON, but there are many of us who have been in this space, and to read as much as possible and reach out to the advocates and the advocacy groups to help you target, if you will, your member on this particular issue. Sometimes all it takes is a whole lot of education.
Could be a whole lot. Ms. De La Torre, would you like to say something about that?
I agree with Judge Morrow. It's really just about finding, who's available in that area and putting the feet on the ground to come together and advocate for all of these people. Yeah.
Good. And Congressman, I don't know who this person's representative is either, but I'm confident it's not you. And because we've seen hunger and food insecurity become a partisan issue, this can't be your first go round with people casting aspersions on those who need government benefits and SNAP in particular. And I'm wondering how you respond to your colleagues in the debates and discussions that you have when this is the argument that's thrown at you.
Well, there is a philosophical divide, and ironically, in many of the districts that my colleagues represent, where they advocate the view that people that are on food stamps are all cheating the system, and it's all, people driving up to the food bank in their Mercedes to get food, and people would rather not work; they'd rather just rely on welfare. It's many of the rural parts of the country that are the most dependent on SNAP, where people are the most food insecure. And I think it's a disservice to their own constituents when they advocate that way and try to present that picture of Americans who are in need. People want to work. I don't know anyone who doesn't want to work. They want the dignity of work. They want to provide for themselves and their family. But things happen. Sometimes there's an illness in the family. Now there's an illness all over the country, and people need help, and there's no shame in needing help. So it is something we continually have to overcome. There are periodic moves to impose more and more onerous work requirements on anyone that would get a food benefit. The practical reality right now, I was talking to Jackie Goldberg, one of our school board members from LA Unified, and she was telling me, they've become a food distribution center because kids that would normally get their meal, sometimes their only meal of the day at school, are coming now to pick up food, and thank goodness they're open to provide that food. but they're not checking ID to see, okay, who's really a student in the school and who isn't a student. They're trying to also provide technology to kids, because if we're moving to online learning, those that were far behind economically are going to fall further behind if they can't get an education because they don't have access to a tablet or a Wi-Fi. And so these school districts are hemorrhaging money, like cities are and states are right now, which is why it's so important, I think, that the federal government help during this time of crisis for school districts and for cities and states. You know, certainly if we had 2.2 trillion that the federal government could give away in the form of a tax cut for wealthy corporations and wealthy families, certainly we have enough to feed America during a pandemic. You know, one other note about the food bank situation. I'm heading out to the Burbank Temporary Aid Facility today. Their donations are down because people aren't working. They have a hard time having the people power they need because people are afraid to go out during the pandemic. So these food facilities are really struggling. When my staff told them, you know, he wants to come out and volunteer, the congressman wants to come out and volunteer, put him to work. They said, there's no problem. We have the work we need him to do. So they need the help right now. And the American people need the help right now. And I think we need to stop stigmatizing people who, through no fault of their own, have fallen on hard times. And that now is a huge chunk of the American people.
I actually think that's a great segue to a question I had for you, Ms. De La Torre, which is that much of what you talked about, Congressman, that applies to school children is also going to be true in community colleges. That they rely a lot on what's happening at that college to provide them with support and stability. And I'm certain that the pantry that you operate is an important part of their lives. And many of them won't be able to go back to school. They need to now do things that have costs associated with them. Just as for school children, there's a cost associated with doing online learning. You need the hardware to be able to do that online learning. And I don't know if you are anticipating, as we, you know, approach fall in a few months, a resurgence of need among students, and what's going to happen to those students who cannot return to school.
Yes, you know, for the students who won't be able to return to school, we will have to treat them like we treat our community members. You know, we will give them the services that we provided before. Having pantry services, as far as resource referrals, SNAP applications. You're giving them everything that they need, the tools that they need to get the food on their table.
And do you see that the community college system responding in any way, in a more global way, to trying to assess what it can do to provide additional or different kinds of resources for its students in ways that it hasn't been called upon to do so before?
I think right now that is something that we're thinking of. Everyone's right now trying to create new ideas to provide support to all of our students. I know that CalFresh has also extended their EBTUs to Amazon and to Walmart, and we're trying to extend our services to Instacart as well. So we do know that, you know, small changes need to be made, and we have to come back every day thinking of new ways to help our students. And that's what we're going to keep doing until we have a solution.
Good. Thank you, because I think it's that kind of persistence that is essential as we start to look at this and the long-term impact that we're going to see. I know that there's a lot of focus now on how do we respond in the face of a pandemic, that especially in a context in which it has thrown so many people into a food insecure circumstance that they'd never experienced before. But we also, certainly as people who are engaged in policy and change and social justice, we have to start to think about recovery too, whatever that means. I'm not sure that's the right R word, frankly, but there is some element about thinking through, as we emerge from the pandemic, what systems do we want to have in place, have anticipated? What do we need to do to be forward thinking? Even just to think about if this happens, when it happens again. But also just what have we learned? Have we learned anything that we can do that would make things better in this country overall? What a hard lesson to go through, but to have nothing to show for it makes it a truly horrific lesson. Congressman, I'll start with you.
Well, I'm glad you asked the question, because I think that what this pandemic is doing is it is revealing all over again, and in the most graphic ways and sometimes the most deadly ways, these persistent inequities, injustices, and disparities in our society, where, for example, if you look at some states that have only 10% or less of population that's African American, they represent 40% of the casualties of the virus. You see Mexican Americans losing their jobs at a rate far faster than other communities. And in terms of food insecurity, efforts by the administration to prevent food assistance from going to undocumented people. Are we going to let our fellow human beings starve right now or fail to get treatment because of their immigration status? So these divides we already had, unequal access to capital, for example, we see being aggravated in a small business program where the large banks get to pick their favorite customers. And I think what it requires of us is to pay acute attention right now to the most vulnerable among us, and make sure they have enough to eat, make sure they have access to healthcare, make sure that they can put and keep a roof over their heads. But it also means, I think, that as we begin to emerge from this, when we begin to emerge from this, we think about how do we build back better? How do we build back a more fair, more just, more equitable society? In the same way we built a better country after the Great Depression and after World War II, we ought to think about how do we build back a better country after this pandemic, and not just with an eye to preventing or guarding against the next pandemic, but just making ourselves a better society, where there's less disparity between the super rich and the super poor, and the middle classes is just trying to survive. So I think this is a real challenge that we need to think about right now, to cushion the shock of this pandemic to those that are most vulnerable, and think about, okay, as we start to build back, how do we repair now so many of the tears we have seen in the social network and in the fabric of our society, so that we do a better job looking after our fellow citizens.
Thank you. Judge Morrow?
So I very much agree with Congressman Schiff. What we've seen on the ground is that the problems that we were working on before the pandemic tend to be the problems we are working on now: housing, food insecurity, the criminalization of poverty, the treatment of low-wage workers, the minimum wage, things of this nature. These were all issues that we were advocating on before this pandemic began. What we have seen, I think, is that the pandemic, it has almost had the effect of ripping the cover off of all these issues for a lot of policymakers that we're dealing with. And they are finally beginning to understand in a way that I don't think they ever did before, and certainly would not have, but for these circumstances that are facing our communities, that there are such inequities in the system that have to be fixed if our communities are going to be able to survive. So it's a terrible thing to say that there's a silver lining to a pandemic, but in a certain way, I think this has given us a clearer voice and more of an opportunity to really drive home points that we've been making for years, and have them understood in a much clearer way.
Thank you. Ms. De La Torre? Mute, you're muted.
Hi. Yes, I agree with Congressman Schiff, and it is really about destigmatizing this idea of receiving government-funded aid, and being able to really advocate for everyone that's out there that needs this right now, and to highlight the cost of living, like Judge Morrow was saying. These problems existed before this pandemic, and that's what the root of the problem is. How are we going to have fair housing, so that we can get food to the table?
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Congressman, I will give you one final word if you would like it, before we have to close out the program.
Well, thank you. Thank you for Abby for organizing this and bringing us all together, and for the work you've done pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and will do long after this is over. I guess just to conclude, we will get through this. The question is, how much pain and misery do we have to suffer until we do? And what is so grieving to me about much of the last 3 months is that so much suffering is completely unnecessary. I think so much of the hunger we see right now is unnecessary. If we had a stronger, more sensible approach to how we deal with food insecurity, the food is there. The food is going to rot right now. But also so much of the sickness we have seen and so much of the death we have seen has been unnecessary. If we had a better response early on and to the present day. But we'll get through this. And I really just would conclude by underscoring what we were talking about a moment ago, and that is the need, as we emerge from this, to start mending the torn fabric of our society. We've discovered, for example, all kinds of people who fall through the cracks of the unemployment system. People that are freelancers and work in the gig economy, people who have mixed income. And we're addressing some of those problems during the pandemic, but when the pandemic goes away, those problems are going to persist. And so many others, including food insecurity. So we need to be thinking about how we recover, but how we build back a better, stronger, fairer, more just American society.
Thank you. I really want to thank all of our speakers, the Congressman, Margaret Morrow from Public Counsel, Marisa De La Torre from Pasadena City College. I want to just close by saying that we've talked a lot about a lot of numbers. We've talked about a lot of kinds of communities. Judge Morrow talked about a couple of individuals. And I think that is so important because these are people. We are talking about real human beings. We are talking about vast numbers of human beings, and that putting this into a context of thinking about what 60 million food insecure people means, that is actually almost twice the entire population of Canada. It is a stunning number, and nothing will help them and nothing will change unless we all are motivated to help make that change. Change doesn't happen all by itself. That is what a democracy is about. That is the fundamental principle of democracy, is that we, the people, make our voices heard, and we speak to our elected representatives, and they do our will. The majority will in this country is a will to destigmatize, to support, to uplift, to expand. This is a country that believes in taking care of those who are struggling. And we see people struggling in every state, in every community, in every neighborhood, in families. And our role here is to allow them to hear our voices and to make certain that we do not get ignored. If you want to learn more, if you want to get involved, please visit MAZON's website at www.mazon.org. Again, thank you so much for being with us today and for doing what you can to help end food insecurity in the United States.